That trilogy is great. Master,
Yes.
Davros, and
This is the story he did. This is very much, if you really want an idea of what they can do on audio, this has got only 4 or 5 characters. It is set in a house. It is almost entirely set in that house. It is dark. It is claustrophobic. The performances are brilliant. It may well be McCoy's best performance in Doctor Who, period. At least in my humble opinion, for what that's worth. And it is a fantastic story. So if you really want an idea of what Big Finish can do on audio, this is a very good example of it.
What do you think of their new master?
Well, spoilers. There is, and I've got that on here as well. I should have, note to self, next time actually prepare a presentation. I'm not going to lie, last year I had like 6 people turn up for this panel, so I was expecting to be talking to myself for a lot of this. This is Unit Dominion, which was released in late 2012. And the bald-headed gentleman on the right side of your screen is an actor named Alex McQueen. For those of you who have seen The Thick of It with Peter Capaldi, or its kind of sort of film spin-off, In the Loop, may recognize him from that. In the Loop, he plays the British UN ambassador who Peter Capaldi keeps setting off to put back and reschedule the vote that the British government is trying to get, if you need to recognize him. For a lot of this story, and this is a very big spoiler, but I don't think there's a way around it with what we're going to be talking about in a minute with Paul McGann, he's initially introduced as a potential future Doctor. That's really the implication of it, though there is something that's a bit off about him.
Oh, yeah.
And in one of the best Doctor Who cliffhangers ever, which I am about to ruin for all of you, it is revealed he is the Master. And he is actually orchestrating all the events of this story and been masquerading as a possible future incarnation of the Doctor the whole time, so he can do so. He is absolutely fantastic.
Goes back to Roger Delgado.
He goes back
sense
to
of humor.
Yeah, the sense of humor, suave, charming when he needs to be, but absolutely terrifying when he needs to be. I mean, this guy has a voice like you would not believe. He has actually now crossed over into the current run of 8th Doctor stories. I believe I've got that on here. Yes, I do. We'll actually
finish won many awards for Dark
Yeah, we'll
Eyes.
use this one. I wish I had a better version of this. This is what they're currently running with Paul McGann. It's a series called Dark Eyes. This actually picks up after a previous run of 8th Doctor stories they did, which were originally commissioned by BBC Radio. Yes, the BBC commissioned somebody else to make Doctor Who for them, at least on audio.
And those are all great.
You have 2 on there as well.
Yes, I'm going to get to that in a second. This was released in 2012, I believe. October, November of 2012. I think, even though it picks up where something else left off, it is an absolutely perfect jumping on point for anybody who wants to, get into the Paul McGann audios. You're kind of told what you need to know as it goes along. It is a big 4-CD box set with a 5th CD full of interviews and extras. It is a bit expensive. I think it's about $30–40 depending on where you buy it from. It is absolutely worth it though. That said, I think the download's what, 20–25 bucks?
That's the thing.
I think 25.
If you're on a budget, which I am, and I do all downloads because they are phenomenally cheaper than having CDs shipped to you.
Yeah.
And Big Finish keeps them for you on their website. You can go and get into your account and re-download anything that that you've purchased.
Yeah, if you have issues with space on your computer, Big Finish, at least at the moment, supposing they don't ever lose the Doctor Who license, which with the way things are going, I sincerely doubt. I think they're renewed through like 2016 or 2017 now. They actually keep them permanently in your account on the website, so if you have to delete it, you can go back and get it. You don't have to worry. There's no limits on the downloading. Speaking of that, the first 50 main range stories, which covers from September 1999 through Zagreus, which is their 40th anniversary story released November 2003, the CDs are no longer in print, but they are, and this is a really good bargain for any of you who have not heard Big Finish. They are $2.99 each on download for a full 2 hours worth of audio.
For cinematic movie in your head.
Yeah, and that includes Paul McGann's first story, Storm Warning.
That's a good one too.
Yeah, it's the Grays, which is the big 40th anniversary story, which I will say that if you've heard the Paul McGann audios that lead up to it, it is fantastic. If, however, you have never heard Big Finish before, do not go to that story first just because of the multi-doctor story. It's kind of like if, the TV series now will pick up on big arc threads. It's actually picking up from the cliffhanger of the second Paul McGann season, and it sets up what they do in the third Paul McGann season. Avoid it like the plague if you have not heard those, because you will not understand a thing that is going on.
Yeah, if you are new to Big Finish, the wisest thing to do is on their site, they ask you, are you new? And if you go to that where you're new,
Yeah.
they have stories to recommend that you start with.
Right.
And boy, you will get hooked.
Yeah, and the first 50 main range on download are a mere $2.99 for a full 2 hours, sometimes 2.5 hours
Yeah.
worth of audio. So, I mean, if you really want a good jumping off point, that's a good place to go. I think they recommend Sword of Orion, which was Paul McGann's second story. Is a good place to jump on. It's a very good, creepy, traditional Cyberman story. The Cybermen are very effective in that. If you want something more recent, Dark Eyes is a very good place to go. It's a bit more expensive, but it is a very big story told across 4 CDs. It also has Toby Jones, who you may be able to see on the right, but it's a bit pixelated because I did not get a better quality version of this cover, who you may know as the Dream Lord from the episode Amy's Choice. He's also the Nazi scientist in the Captain America movies. Actually is sort of playing the villain in that. Obviously it's got Paul McGann, and the woman here on the left is Ruth Bradley, who some of you may know from Primeval, the British series. And this is, as I said, the current run of what Paul McGann stories are doing. They actually have just back in February, I believe, released this. This is Dark Eyes 2. This is the most recent Paul McGann release. And these box sets have been so successful that box sets numbers 3 and 4 have already been commissioned. 3 was just recorded within the last 2 or 3 weeks, I believe. It will be out in November, and box set number 4 will be out in February of next year. So if you want to jump on board with Paul McGann and the most recent stuff, Dark Eyes and then Dark Eyes 2 are a very good place to jump on, I would say.
Don't forget that the first one actually won awards.
Yes, the first one has actually won awards. There's this arm of the BBC itself which hands out what they call, I believe, the Audio Drama Awards. Every year since for about the last 5 or 6 years, not just for obviously what the BBC does, but what's also done by independent companies like Big Finish. And this the first Dark Eyes set won a very prestigious award, won that award for, I think, non-broadcast or internet-based storylines. And it got praise from everybody, from Russell T Davies, Stephen Moffat. So, and speaking of which, how many of you saw Night of the Doctor with Paul McGann? The little prequel thing they released explaining where John Hurt's Doctor came from? Okay.
People who haven't.
Okay, for those of you who have seen it, you may recall that just before Paul McGann regenerates, he lists off a list of people, Charlie, Karis, Lucy, Molly, Casman.
Yeah.
They are all Big Finish companions. They are not from the books that were done with Paul McGann. They're not from the comic strips. They're from the Big Finish audios.
Just an incredible moment.
Yes, for those of
The
you
whole
who have
thing
been
was great, and then they did that, and it was like, you gotta be kidding me. They
I
actually
was woke up
accomplished
at 6
it.
a.m. in the morning by text from him screaming at me to get out of bed, get out of bed. I've been waiting so long for this, get out of bed.
That's about what I did when I watched it. My wife came out of the shower and said, "Are you okay?" It appeared on the screen.
Matthew and I had the treat of talking with Paul Spragg, who is one of the, the big Finish, who
Paul
recently
Spragg,
died.
Paul Spragg, who is sadly no longer with us. He
Yeah.
passed away just a couple of months ago at the age of 39.
Yeah, and he told us about what happened at Big Finish when Night of the Doctor came out, because they were not prepared.
They had a very vague idea that it was coming because they had got Paul McGann in to record, I think, Dark Eyes 2 at that point. And Paul said, "I've just recorded this short thing." And Nicholas Briggs, as we say, who actually wrote the first Dark Eyes box set and wrote the first CD story from this set, does, as I said, the Dalek voices and everything else. I believe was doing Day of the Doctor or Time of the Doctor. And Stephen Moffat came up to him and said, by the way, we put in and said, apparently, I think if I remember what Nick Briggs has said on the Big Finish podcast, that he actually, Moffat came up to him and they were talking about things. He goes, yeah, I put in some of your companions in there to reference for Paul McGann, and the Big Finish site exploded right after that.
The servers went down.
Yeah, and I actually, I had personal experience of people who would not touch these audios with a 10-foot pole. Who thought I was nuts for talking about them, and suddenly went, okay, I've just watched this thing with Paul McGann. Who are all these people? And it's like, you know those audios you get annoyed with me mentioning? Yeah, they're from there. Oh.
And Paul Sprague, who works out of this, he said this little office and it's all stacked, you know, boxes and boxes of CDs and stuff. He said when everything comes pouring in, the servers are crashing, and they can't fill the orders.
I mean, it is
Struggling.
Yeah, struggling to get it
All of a sudden they've been found, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it's kind of, you know, people have debated for years about spin-off, what parts of the Doctor Who spin-off media are canon, if any. And it was a big moment of really the TV series acknowledging that yes, this thing that's been going on somewhere else actually is a part of the Doctor Who universe now. So at the very least, the Paul McGann audios are canon. I would like to think that they're all canon, which actually brings us to an interesting point, which is two of them have been kind of sort of adapted for the new series. And I think I've got at least one of them on here. Jubilee is an audio from 2003, I believe. Well, actually, we'll start with this one, because how many of you went to the Rise of the Cybermen Age of Steel screening about 2 weeks ago? Anybody? In theaters? Well, that just leaves the two of us.
Yeah. We're the only geeks in the room.
They don't advertise things very well in Huntsville. We didn't know about it.
Well, we put it on the con page.
Did you?
So, you know,
Yeah, it was on Facebook.
Yeah, we put it on our Facebook, but that's not really the point. That story is inspired by this audio released in 2002 with Peter Davison's Doctor and Sarah Sutton playing Nyssa. And unlike that story, which went off into a parallel universe and created all sorts of things, this goes back to the Cybermen's origins in this universe. And the Cybermen originally introduced in the 10th Planet all the way back in 1966. This is a story that is, I think it's safe to say, I think very dark, quite grim, but it is, as Russell T Davies himself has said, it is one of the best Doctor Who stories ever told. If you want somewhere really good to start, though you'd be kind of starting at the top and working your way down at that point. This is very good. This is May range release number 33 or 34.
Yeah.
So
Part of that $2.99 on download.
$2.99 on download, 2 hours for this for $3. Very much worthwhile. The first Dalek episode from the new series, Dalek with Christopher Eccleston, written by Rob Shearman, is inspired by a 6 Doctor audio released in January 2003 called Jubilee. And those of you who know that big scene with the reveal of the Dalek in that episode, of him walking in and saying, "I'm here to help," and the Dalek kind of coming alive and threatening him, is an almost word-for-word copy of the cliffhanger of the first episode of Jubilee. That is a fantastic story as well. That's release number 40, I believe. That's $2.99 as well. So for $6, you can get those 2 stories and be really well started. Or I guess for $9, you can get Storm Warning, which is Paul McGann's first story, and you can really be well started off in terms of Big Finish's continuity.
And if you have an area of real interest, like if you like the Cybermen, there's a whole spin-off series of the Cybermen.
I've actually got the covers on here.
Okay. And if you are into the Daleks and Davros, those are also spin-off series in Big Finish.
Yeah, the I, Davros series.
I, Davros.
Sort of a homage to I, Claudius. It's just really...
And that's an example of what Big Finish can do, because they actually sort of extrapolated from the various Dalek stories and from the various classic series stories where Davros appeared, and actually worked in his entire backstory of, you know, who this guy, who he is, where he came from, how this guy, who's a brilliant scientist, ended up, you know, scarred, stuck in the bottom half of a Dalek, and ended up inventing them. And that is really what the four stories they did in that season really do. It's also notable for getting Peter Miles, who played Niter in Genesis of the Daleks, back in the last story, and they kind of, in a way, lead into Genesis of the Daleks as well. So it's a really good example of what Big Finish can do of going in and filling sort of some of the holes in the show's history, but also without contradicting it.
Right.
And actually not really being slavish or sort of overly reliant on the continuity. You can enjoy them as stories in their own right. I actually just listened to the I, Davros series about a year or so ago and picked up references to stories I actually had never spotted before. But it's not something that actually takes away if you don't get those references. It is a brilliant sort of self-contained drama in its own right. As to a certain extent is the Cybermen spin-off series they did as well that was released, I believe in 2001 or 2002.
Yeah.
I think it was 2002. They initially did a season of 4 stories. This is the second one called Fear, and they followed it up with the second season, which was a big box set of another 4 stories in between them. It's a really interesting story of basically the Cybermen manipulating people.
Yeah.
Which actually you would think of them as the Cybermen are always viewed as these cold, emotionless beings, and actually are very adept at manipulating people's emotions. And the Cybermen basically end up occupying Earth at the end of the first season and throughout the second season, kind of following this kind of resistance to them. So it's some really fantastic stuff there.
Does anybody have any recommendations, a favorite that you have that you'd love to have everybody hear about?
The Apocalypse Elements.
Oh,
Oh, yes.
I mean, if you really, I think before Day of the Doctor presented us with the fall of Arcadia and the last day of the last great Time War, this was the closest thing you could get to a Time War story. In fact, while we're talking about that, Russell T Davies, in a book that came out in 2005, I believe it's a Doctor Who storybook of the Doctor Who Annual, actually did a whole essay about the history of the Time War, and actually referenced this story as being one of the opening shots of that war. This has Colin Baker's Doctor in it, Lalla Ward as Romana, actually as the president of the Time Lords, and actually dealing with the Daleks basically trying to invade Gallifrey.
And the companion as well.
Yes, Evelyn Smythe, played by Maggie Stables. I mean, she was Big Finish's first original companion that was not based on the TV series.
Yes.
She's I don't want to say elderly, middle-aged?
Middle-aged. Yeah.
Middle-aged
Professor.
British history
older.
professor
Uh-huh.
who ends up traveling with Colin Baker's Doctor.
An excellent foil for
An
him.
excellent
Yeah.
foil for him,
Yes.
and because Colin Baker's Doctor being big and pompous and kind of overbearing.
Yeah, and she's not intimidated in the least by him.
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about how really they softened his Doctor out.
Oh, yeah.
That was a big
Gave
part
him
of it.
Evelyn.
They gave
Yeah.
him Evelyn. And even in the stories with him and Nicola Bryant playing Perry, they have really toned it, they've made him a more genuinely likable character.
Even her first story, they introduced the things that Marion.
The Marion Conspiracy,
That's a-
release number 6.
That's a great starting point.
Yeah, that's a
That
great
is-
starting
that's
point as
another
well.
great one.
$2.99 is on download. That CD I think might actually still be available. It was when I was scrolling through things a couple of weeks ago. But you know how that is when they're not reprinting things.
That was remarkable because that's not a companion the TV show would ever bring in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, that's what I like about her. I mean,
And
she's
she's
older,
superb.
there's
Not
no
cool.
sense in
Yeah.
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 So great. Yeah, exactly.
None of that.
None of the snogging.
Older,
It's not
personality in
Yeah.
herself,
Yeah.
doesn't have to be attractive.
She has
Yeah.
such an
She's
epic
got her
arc.
personality.
She's
Was
phenomenal.
she
Yeah.
from the 80s, 90s? I can't remember what time frame she's from originally.
I think she's from the
Early-
early 2000s.
early
I think
2000s,
is the
yeah.
idea. I think she's supposed to be contemporary, and Marion Conspiracy was early mid-2000s, so we'll say roughly from that point.
That's right, because I remember that she printed out stuff. So I knew at least computers were around that time frame at least.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
she's from about that period, and they did a whole run of stories with her. Because she's actually been quite ill for a while now, they have actually recorded a 7th Doctor story that's technically her final story. But she is a fantastic actress.
Yeah.
Her story, she is always good. The stories she's in might, Big Finish, it has to be said, for anybody who thinks that we are singing Big Finish's praises a bit too much. Like the TV series, like the novels, like I guess any sort of series of, well, anything really, that you will have stories which are absolutely great, brilliant. You will have things that are middle of the road. You will have things that are absolutely dreadfully terrible.
They're more consistent than most, I gotta say.
Yeah.
I really do believe they are.
Especially as time has gone on, they have gotten, I think, far more consistent. There are some duds.
You're the big.
But most of them, I wouldn't rate below 3 stars.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they have something for
3 to
everybody,
5.
because
Yeah.
there are some real traditional stories. You see, those I consider, you know, are the missteps and the duds, are the tradition.
Probably one of my
There are people
least-
who like the traditional
Least
stories.
favorite one is that companion chronicles with Romana 1, because she was the only one doing the one voice and
Yeah.
playing all those characters. And it was just,
Yeah.
Is it
Just-
Farrell's Folly or something?
Yeah.
Steelers Were Safe and Farrell's Folly, yeah.
yeah, I just didn't like that one too much.
So another thing to note about this one, you were talking about the spin-off, this one and a couple of other ones that go with it that actually kick off in the Dalek Empire, which is an
Yes.
excellent series.
Yeah, well, and looking at Romana here reminds me of the spin-off Gallifrey.
Well,
Yeah.
and we were
Series.
talking about Shada. You said you were going to bring
Yeah.
up Shada too,
Yes,
which
we
actually,
should mention that. Shada, for those of you who, I'm sure, anybody here who does not know what Shada is? Okay, you know who Douglas Adams is? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? He wrote for Doctor Who during Tom Baker's era. He wrote 3 stories, 2 of which were broadcast, Pirate Planet, and he actually basically took and rewrote somebody else's script for the story City of Death, which is why it's credited to a guy named David Agnew, who in fact does not exist. It was in fact a BBC pseudonym that they were forced to use because of writers' rules at the time. And he wrote one final story called Shada for Tom Baker's Doctor, which they actually went to Cambridge, filmed footage in 1979. They went into the studio, filmed material from across the story, based around 2 or 3 sets from that story. And then I think the BBC electricians went on strike. The story never got finished. It is incomplete.
You can get it on DVD, but
You can
it's
get
not
what they did film on DVD has been released with linking narration with Tom Baker. There's the Gareth Roberts novelization released a couple of years ago, which, if I may toot my own horn for a moment, if you buy the paperback edition of that and look on the second page of critics' reviews, you'll see One for the Valley Planet. I wrote that. Probably the closest it'll ever come to being anything official Doctor Who. But in 2003, as part of the 40th anniversary celebrations, Big Finish got together with what was then known as BBCI, basically the web arm of the BBC, and they did what was on their website a Flash animated version, but also this here, which is the version released on CD. Now, as we mentioned, they kept trying to get Tom Baker back to do it. Tom Baker has acknowledged this was one of his favorite stories, and he always hated they never finished it. But even that could not tempt him in 2003 to come to work for Big Finish. So instead, they got Paul McGann's Doctor in to play it. Now, that seems like a really weird substitution, given that they are kind of polar opposites of one another as doctors. That said, Paul McGann comes in and he makes that story his own.
He does.
That's a good one.
I mean, he is fantastic in it, and it's still got one of my favorite cliffhangers ever, which is the end of part 3. Well, they're on the spaceship. There's an invisible spaceship in the story.
cheapest set ever.
Cheapest set ever. And also,
Brilliant. Why don't they do that every season?
also invisible spaceships look a lot more impressive. They don't look like models. Actually, with the ship's computer, who he convinces he's not dead.
Oh, that's right, yes,
And
yes.
actually works in this kind of really weird logic of, okay, well, you know, you think I'm dead, therefore I am dead, therefore I cannot give you any commands which would hurt the guy who owns the ship. And then the computer turns around and it's like, well, if you are dead, you do not require oxygen, and I am programmed not to have the program to save all your energy resources.
That's right.
And it ends with the computer going, dead men do not require oxygen. Dead men do not require oxygen. It is a brilliant
It is,
cliffhanger.
okay, yeah.
So Paul McGann really comes in, he makes the story its own. It's got a really good cast. Andrew Sachs, who if you know British comedy, Manuel from Fawlty Towers, I think he actually makes a fairly good villain in this. I think you and I have disagreed on this. Sean Biggerstaff, who you may know from the first 2 Harry Potter films, I cannot remember what character he plays in those, is in this as well. So Susanna Harker, who you may know from the original House of Cards, and the Pride and Prejudice adaptation with Colin Firth is in this as well. James Fox is a very well-known British character actor who is in this as well. It is a fantastic story. Douglas Adams himself never thought a whole lot of it, but I think he really underrated it. And this release, I think, really does it justice.
Isn't this like a 6 CD?
It's 6 episodes,
Big.
but it's 2 CDs because
Okay.
each episode's 25 minutes because it's done in the serial format of the classic series, which a lot of the Big Finish audios tend to be 25 to 30-minute episodes, usually 4 episodes for a 2-part story. So if you're used to the classic series structure, that's kind of how they're done. But I think as time's got on, they've started to kind of emulate what the new series has done in terms of...
The Eighth Doctor and Lucy, they are really, if you're a fan of the new show, the Eighth Doctor, there's that whole separate series, separate from the Doctor and Charlie.
Yes.
But the Doctor and Lucy Miller sets are dead on what the modern shows do.
Yeah, it's the modern series.
And that's a great jumping on point.
Yeah.
And most of the box sets are like that.
And a
too,
lot of the
so-
box sets are
They're
as well.
45-minute episodes like the modern
Yeah,
shows.
Dark Eyes is another good example of
Oh, yeah.
that. It basically actually combines, I think, with the kind of the new series style storytelling of doing these big epic stories, but actually does it in a serial format of doing, because it's technically 4 episodes, but it's part of one big story, but it does the format, the stories are told in